Marcus Reid stood near the back panel of the elevator, hands folded loosely in front of him, watching the floor numbers climb in silence. He wore a plain navy suit, off the rack, decently fitted but carrying none of the visual signaling that men in this building tended to communicate status with before they spoke a single word. No monogram, no visible logo anywhere. A watch that told time accurately and nothing else. He'd bought the suit the same way he bought most of his clothes, quickly and without particular thought, the specific practical efficiency of a man who had never once seen the point of performing wealth for an audience that hadn't earned the right to require it. The elevator car held two other people that morning. Bradley Simmons, CEO of Meridian Holdings, stood near the control panel, mid-conversation with a senior vice president beside him. Patricia Nolan, a woman in her late 40s, whose sharp business suit and confident posture read, "In this building, exactly the way suits and posture were meant to read." Neither of them had looked at Marcus more than once since the doors closed. Bradley glanced sideways now, a half-second scan that took in the suit, the plain shoes, the complete absence of anything that registered to him as belonging. "Somebody let the mailroom take the executive elevator today," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. The specific casual carelessness of a man completely certain he was speaking about someone rather than to them. Patricia laughed, uncertainly, glancing once toward Marcus and then quickly away. The particular discomfort of someone who sensed the joke had landed somewhere it shouldn't have, but hadn't yet decided what to do about that feeling. Marcus didn't turn, didn't react, continued watching the floor numbers climb. Bradley Simmons had no idea he was about to introduce his new boss to 14 other people in under 2 minutes. He was about to find out the hard way. If you can already feel what's coming, if something about this elevator ride has your full attention, hit the like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we tell stories like this one every single week. Drop your country in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. Now, let's understand exactly who's standing in that elevator and why today matters more than Bradley Simmons could possibly imagine. The morning had started, for Marcus, at Reid Capital Partners' modest, entirely unglamorous headquarters. No marble lobby, no dramatic art collection commissioned to impress visiting clients. Simply an efficient floor of analysts working quietly, and a corner office Marcus rarely bothered to sit in for more than an hour at a stretch. He'd reviewed the final acquisition paperwork with his general counsel that morning, the specific unhurried thoroughness of a man who had completed transactions like this one dozens of times over 15 years, and had never once needed to perform excitement about any of them. Reid Capital had spent the past 18 months quietly, methodically acquiring shares in Meridian Holdings through a series of legally disclosed but low-profile transactions, small purchases through different funds and vehicles, none individually large enough to trigger the kind of attention that might have prompted Meridian's leadership to ask questions sooner. 3 weeks ago, the acquisitions had crossed the majority ownership threshold. This morning, the board would formally announce the change to Meridian's full executive team. 15 years earlier, a younger Marcus, same plain suit style, same quiet economy of presentation, had sat across from a room of investors during an early fundraising pitch, watching most of them glance at their phones rather than his projections, dismissing the meeting in under 10 minutes. He remembered, with the specific clarity certain memories never fully lose, exactly how many of those same investors had reached out privately years later, once Reid Capital's returns became public record, asking quietly whether there was still room for their capital. He had stopped taking those initial dismissals personally a long time ago. He had learned, instead, to treat them as information, useful, reliable information about exactly who was paying attention and who wasn't. That morning, his assistant had handed him a folder, the acquisition summary, the board's formal announcement schedule, a single line at the bottom confirming today's 10 a.m. executive meeting where Meridian's leadership would learn, for the first time, exactly who now controlled their company. Marcus had read it once, closed the folder, and headed out alone the way he traveled everywhere. No entourage, no car service beyond a simple town car. Nothing that announced anything about who was arriving or why it might matter. Back in the elevator, Bradley continued, warming visibly to his own joke now that it had landed once without consequence. "I'm serious. Look at that suit," he said to Patricia, gesturing loosely toward Marcus without fully looking at him. "That's a rental. That's my cousin's wedding suit." Patricia laughed again, more uncomfortably this time, her eyes flicking toward Marcus with a growing unease she couldn't quite name yet. Something in his continued complete stillness registering to her as different from simple embarrassment or intimidation, though she didn't have the framework yet to understand what. Marcus's expression didn't change. He kept watching the floor numbers, hands still folded, his stillness deepening rather than breaking under the weight of the comment. "You headed up to facilities?" Bradley asked, turning to address Marcus directly now. A smirk still settled comfortably on his face, clearly expecting either silence or the kind of deferential answer he'd grown accustomed to receiving from people he'd already decided didn't warrant his full attention. "No," Marcus said. "Even?" "Quiet. 10 a.m. meeting." Bradley's smirk faltered, not fully understanding yet, but the first small crack of uncertainty entering his expression, the specific hesitation of a man whose confident sorting of a stranger had just produced an answer that didn't quite fit the category he'd assigned. 10 a.m. meeting, Bradley repeated, half to himself, still not recalibrating anything about his assumption. "You a vendor? IT contractor?" "Something like that," Marcus said, not elaborating, not performing offense or explanation, simply allowing the moment to continue exactly as it was already unfolding, the specific patience of a man who had learned, across 15 years, that people revealed the most about themselves in the moments right before they were corrected. Bradley read the non-answer as confirmation, rather than the dry, precise understatement it actually was, and turned back to Patricia with a small, satisfied smile. The specific self-congratulation of a man who believed he'd correctly sorted a stranger and could now move on to more important things. "See, this is what I'm talking about," he said to her, still not lowering his voice. "Half these outside contractors show up looking like they wandered in off the street. Makes the whole floor look unprofessional." Patricia didn't laugh this time. Her expression had shifted fully into discomfort now, something about Marcus's continued silence unsettling her in a way that had nothing to do with awkwardness and everything to do with a feeling she couldn't yet articulate. The specific instinct of someone standing closer than they realized to something they hadn't identified. The elevator chimed softly. The doors began to slide open onto the executive floor. Right here, before those doors fully open. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the next 90 seconds are the entire reason this story exists. Hit the bell. Drop your country in the comments. We're reading every single one. Now, watch exactly what Bradley Simmons is about to walk into. As the doors slid fully open, Bradley stepped forward first, still mid-sentence, delivering one final comment over his shoulder as he exited into the corridor. "Anyway, elevators down the hall if you need the service entrance for next time." He walked out without waiting for any response, confident, entirely unbothered, already moving toward the boardroom at the end of the hall, where 15 executives sat gathered, waiting for the 10 a.m. meeting to begin. Marcus stepped out behind him, unhurried, his expression exactly as composed as it had been the entire ride up. Patricia followed a step behind, glancing back at Marcus once, with an expression now fully uneasy, though she still didn't understand precisely why. This was, in its own quiet way, the lowest point of the entire encounter, not because anything worse was about to happen to Marcus, but because the specific, casual, confident cruelty of Bradley's final comment landed with the complete, untroubled certainty of a man who had no idea he'd just insulted the person about to hold his entire professional future in one hand. Marcus followed him down the hall toward the boardroom without a word. Bradley walked into the boardroom first, greeting a few executives with the easy, practiced casualness of a man who had run this exact meeting dozens of times before, settling into his usual seat at the head of the long conference table. The board chair, Eleanor Voss, 71 years old, present specifically that morning to formally introduce the ownership transition to the full team, rose from her seat as Marcus entered the room behind Bradley. "Everyone," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly and evenly across the room, "I'd like to introduce Marcus Reid, founder and managing partner of Reid Capital Partners, and, as of this morning's board vote, the new majority shareholder and chairman of Meridian Holdings." The room shifted instantly. 15 executives rose to their feet almost as a single motion, the specific choreographed reflex of a room recalibrating its entire understanding of the situation in real time, chairs scraping back, hands extending across the table. "Mr. Chairman," one executive said, reaching to shake Marcus's hand. "Mr. Chairman, welcome to Meridian," said another, close behind. Bradley Simmons, still standing near his usual seat at the head of the table, had gone completely, visibly pale. Patricia, standing near the door, brought one hand slowly to her mouth, the specific horror of someone replaying the last 90 seconds of elevator conversation in real time, understanding, all at once and with complete clarity, exactly what she had witnessed and exactly what it meant. Bradley opened his mouth. Nothing adequate came out. He looked at Marcus, actually looked at him now, for what felt like the first time, the plain navy suit suddenly reading entirely differently than it had 90 seconds earlier, the same fabric, the same cut, carrying an entirely different weight now that its owner's actual identity had been made unmistakable. "Mr. Reid," Bradley managed finally, his voice unsteady in a way it had never once been in 6 years of running meetings in this exact room. We hadn't been formally introduced." "We were introduced," Marcus said, quiet, even. The exact same measured register he'd used the entire elevator ride, which somehow made it land harder than raised anger ever could have. "You called me a mailroom employee wearing a rental suit and told me to use the service entrance." The room went completely, totally silent. 15 executives who moments earlier had been extending handshakes and warm welcomes now stood frozen in place, watching their CEO absorb, in real time and in front of every one of them, the exact consequence of a joke he had made, believing, with total confidence, that no one who mattered was standing close enough to hear it. That was a misunderstanding. I didn't realize. "I know you didn't realize," Marcus said. "That's precisely what I wanted to see." Marcus crossed the room and took the seat at the head of the table. Not Bradley's usual chair exactly, but the chairman's position, deliberately positioned at the room's actual center of authority, now that the ownership had shifted. Bradley, uncertain where to stand, remained awkwardly near his old spot, the specific disorientation of a man who had lost his bearings inside a room he'd occupied confidently for 6 straight years. "Please, sit," Marcus said to the room generally, and the executives did, the specific collective relief of a group grateful for any instruction that returned the room to something resembling normal function after 90 seconds of unfiltered tension. "I'll be direct," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the same even, unhurried quality it had held the entire morning. "I didn't acquire this company to make examples of people. I acquired it because I believe, with the right leadership and the right culture, it's worth significantly more than the market currently prices it at." He paused, looking briefly toward Bradley, who remained standing, unmoving. "What just happened in that elevator isn't why you're losing your position here, Bradley. 3 years of underperforming your sector while telling this board a different story is why that's happening. What happened in the elevator just told me, very clearly, exactly why that gap exists between the story and the numbers." Bradley said nothing. There was nothing left available for him to say. "Patricia," Marcus said, turning toward her directly. She startled slightly, her hand still half raised near her mouth. "You didn't say anything either, in that elevator. But you were uncomfortable the whole ride up. I noticed that too." It wasn't quite absolution, and it wasn't quite an accusation. Simply an acknowledgement, precise and unhurried, of exactly what Marcus had noticed, and exactly how much attention he had paid to noticing it. The meeting proceeded from there with the specific, efficient calm of a room now fully understanding who was actually running it. Marcus walked the executive team through the transition timeline, the operational priorities Reid Capital had identified over 18 months of careful analysis, the specific, substantive work of actually leading a company, rather than simply announcing that he now did. Bradley was informed, quietly, after the session concluded, that his departure would be handled through standard executive transition procedures. No public spectacle, no dramatic firing in front of the assembled room he'd just been humiliated in front of. Simply the same quiet, procedural consequence Marcus had applied to every other decision that morning. Patricia remained. Marcus had noted her discomfort, had acknowledged it directly and without cruelty, and had made clear, in the specific measured way he made most things clear, that noticing discomfort and assigning blame were not the same action. At the end of the day, Marcus rode the same elevator back down alone. The same plain suit. The same quiet stillness. Nothing about his outward presentation changed by anything that had happened in the hours between his arrival and his departure. He glanced once at the panel where the executive floor button sat, the same button Bradley had pressed that morning, without a second thought about who was standing beside him. For a moment, something almost like amusement crossed Marcus's face. Not triumph exactly, something quieter and more permanent than that. The specific quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent 15 years understanding that the people who assumed status was visible on sight were rarely equipped to actually recognize power when it was standing quietly right beside them, and who had, once again, watched that specific truth confirm itself in real time. The doors opened onto the lobby. He stepped out into ordinary evening light, exactly the way he had arrived that morning, alone, unhurried, wearing a suit that told anyone paying close enough attention absolutely nothing about who he actually was, and everything about who he'd chosen to be, regardless of what anyone assumed. If Marcus's story stayed with you, if you understand what it means to be underestimated right up until the exact moment it matters most, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we bring you stories like this one every single week. Hit that like button if this one got you. And drop a comment below, where in the world are you watching from? We read every single one, and we want to know who's out there carrying stories like Marcus carried his. Until next time, the confidence to mock what you don't understand is usually inversely related to the competence to actually understand it.